Good evening and welcome everyone. We are in for a treat this evening. I'm so happy that you joined us. My name is India Walton. I am a senior strategist with Roots Action. And this evening we are going to be joined by Braxton Brewington of the Debt Collective and Melissa Byrne of the 45M, the 45 million of us who are strapped and saddled with student debt. I am a little bit disappointed, well, very disappointed, right? I think that we were promised that if we voted blue, no matter who, that we would see at least $10,000 in student loan debt forgiven. We have not seen that, let alone knowing that the president has the power right now, today, with the stroke of a pen, to cancel student debt for millions of Americans that would free us up to do so many things that have been stolen from our generation, like homeownership, like parenthood, if folks so choose, like regular vacations, like rest. So I think that it's going to be a great time for us to envision a world without student debt together. And Braxton and Melissa are going to help us walk through how we do that together, what foundation and groundwork has been done thus far, and how we work together moving forward to make sure that we get justice for student borrowers, and that poor people aren't punished and saddled with massive amounts of debt, right? We've been told a really filthy lie. When I was growing up, they're like, oh, if you go to college, you're gonna make $1 million more in your lifetime than your non-college grad counterparts. And now we're seeing jobs posted where you need a PhD and it's paying $13 an hour. Completely unacceptable. And we know that no one is paying tens of thousands of dollars in debt with a $13 an hour job. So with that, I am going to introduce our first presenter. I'm fumbling just a little bit because I'm nervous. This is my first time out of the gate with this type of work, so bear with me. Melissa Byrne is an activist. Melissa is badass, y'all. Did y'all know that she dropped a banner in Trump Tower and the CIA, like the Secret Service was after her? Melissa's the opposite of an insider political consultant. This Philly-based organizer and strategist has been on the political front line for years, overseeing direct actions, electoral campaigns, and protests. Melissa organizes defaulted student loan borrowers and parents of future college students to fight for loan forgiveness and free college. Everyone in the chat, drop a very hearty hello and welcome to Melissa. Melissa, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Byrne, and I have student loan debt. And a long time ago, that was actually a hard thing for me to say. I started borrowing as soon as I started college. And I remember my first semester being judged by my fellow peers whose parents wrote them a check to pay for their college, and they weren't taxed on their parents writing them a check to pay for their college. And constantly was judged and for taking out debt, that I was making a bad decision, like how can you be so irresponsible? And then I was doing a lot of other political work, whether it was trying to stop the Iraq war or shut down sweatshops, and just this always fighting for justice, despite like going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. And then all of a sudden I was working to try to stop Social Security benefits from being cut during the early part of the Obama administration. And I went to this meeting that was off the record, and this speaker asked everybody to raise their hand if they had student loan debt. And at this point, I was the youngest in the room. That doesn't happen anymore often. And because I was the youngest, I was the one that had debt. So I raised my hand, and then he goes, well, tell us how much debt you have. And I literally was just like, I'm not telling you how much debt I have. And then he goes, without skipping a beat, well, as long as you're ashamed of your debt, the banks have all the power. And that was the first time in my life I was told that it wasn't my fault that I had student loan debt, that it was something systematic and it was something big and huge. And it wasn't me failing as a human. It wasn't my family failing as families. It was big. And then he asked me how much debt I had again. And I said half the amount, because let's face it, like sitting next to your boss talking about your debt, like that's scary. And shame is a really hard process to overcome. It's not something that just like magically goes away. But the organizer that put me on the spot was no other than the Reverend Jesse Jackson. He's a very good organizer, as you all might know. And so I left that meeting at 8, and it was a 7 a.m. meeting that ended at 8 in the morning. And I left that meeting committed that my part, what I'm going to do in this space is get rid of student loan debt and make college free. And so that's when I started doing this work. And that was in August of 2010. And I have gone through this path of doing other advocacy work while still building and growing this. Worked for Byrne twice, because the better that Byrne did, the faster we would be able to move on this issue. Because rich people, they don't want to write checks to get rid of economic inequality. That's just not what they do. They'll write checks for scholarships programs and stuff like that. So we had to do this on our own. And, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, people weren't talking about this issue. I know there's a couple people in the yeah, good passionate arguments about canceling debt and free college. And now it's this drawing, and then it showed voting block and people that can't get a mortgage. Another older organizer about something around student debt, and she said, "Yeah, I told my kids not to marry anybody with student loan debt." It was just such like, oh my God, that's such a mean, horrible thing to say. And you're saying that to me, and like thinking I wouldn't take that personally.
Melissa,
Wow.
Melissa, we're having a little bit of connectivity issue, I think.
Where we are in this, but now it's like everyone's talking about a pause on debt. Oh, can you hear me now? Now you hear me? Okay. So we're 2 years into a pause, because in March of 2020, very smart people, advocates. I remember talking with Debt Collective about this, and senators were talking about how we needed to do something about student loan debt as the pandemic started. And fortunately, they were able to get a pause in place. And it's really, really hard to turn back on a crisis once you pause a crisis. And we've had 2 years now to show that we don't have to collect student loan debt. And in fact, people's lives are much better when we don't. So that's kind of where we are now. And I'm slowly launching an organization called With the 45 Million, which is like creative action and organizing around canceling the debt. We've done a really cool banner action at the White House last June that's become a stock photo with cancel student debt signs. We've done 2 actions where we wake up the White House staff with a marching band on their way to work. We want them to every month walk past joyful advocates talking about canceling student loan debt with great music. Part of the challenge of this campaign is that we want an executive order. And there's only one. And what I learned working on the Byrne campaign is that staff are able to move things. And so I want the staff of the White House to be super hyped and excited about canceling student loan debt. So every day when they go to work, they're bugging their bosses who are bugging their bosses, who then go into the Oval and talk with the president about the importance of canceling student loan debt. So it's a very different kind of campaign to get the EO, because again, it's one person that has the power to do it. So that's kind of like where we are. India, I'll hand back to you in case you want Braxton to do his intro.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I think that innovative direct actions are like church for activists. And I can't wait to come down to DC and join in the marching band and the wake up call.
Please,
Because
please do. I'll send you the dates.
yeah, that would be great. Everyone, if you have questions, you can drop them in the Q&A. But right now, I want you to imagine if today President Biden eliminated student debt, drop an emoji in the chat that describes how you would feel if your student debt was just wiped out like magic. Because Joe Biden does have a magic pen, by which he can sign an executive order and immediately cancel student loan debt for more than 45 million Americans. So next up, I would like to introduce Braxton Brewington. Braxton is a communications professional and electoral organizer focused on racial, economic, and democratic justice. Braxton currently works for the Debt Collective, a national debtors union fighting to cancel debts and defend millions of households. Recently, Braxton worked as a communications lead for the Democratic parties of Georgia and North Carolina. Everyone give a hearty Roots Action welcome to Braxton Brewington. Take it away, Braxton.
Wow, thank you so much. And thanks, Melissa, for sharing your organizing tactics. So yes, my name is Braxton. I am an organizer with the Debt Collective. So the Debt Collective is a union of debtors. So we are modeled after a labor union, where a labor union says, you know, workers can come together at the workplace and demand better wages. They can demand higher pay, better working conditions. And if they need to, they can withhold the power of their labor as a form of leverage. And so we believe debtors can do the same. We believe debtors can transform our economy by withholding our financial payments, that we can demand write-downs, we can demand cancellations, we can demand outright transformations to our economy. So that's sort of our theory of change here, is that our debts that we hold are actually assets. They are someone else's paycheck. And so the Debt Collective is a debtors union that focuses on multiple household debt types. We're fighting not just for the elimination of debt, but the transformation of the economy so that people don't have to go into debt for their basic needs in the first place, right? So that includes medical debt, that includes criminal legal debt. We want all of that abolished, payday loans, all types of working class debt, immigration debt, household debt. Right now, we're really focused on a campaign to eliminate student debt. So the Debt Collective, which has its roots in Occupy Wall Street, you know, just in 2011, we were laughed at, right? Reporters, journalists, other Democrats and Republicans, so many people said, you all are crazy asking for student debt cancellation. How would that even happen? You all are rich, privileged white kids, you know, you all don't need any type of economic security. And WOW has that issue shifted quite a bit over this decade. So now we're on the precipice of student debt cancellation. We have a world where President Biden, who is in large part the reason why we're in this crisis, had to run on an immediate minimum of $10,000 worth of student loan cancellation for every single borrower. That's how much this issue has shifted over the past few years, right? That even President Biden, who is long beholden to the credit card capital of the world, Delaware, that's how much this issue has shifted. So the Debt Collective is running a campaign, definitely right now focused on student loan debt cancellation. We are advocating for every penny to be erased. So we know that President Biden has complete authority to eliminate federal student loans. That's about 92 or 95% of all the student loan debt that exists. The rest is private debt. Something like private debt elimination might take legislation, but we know that Biden has the power to, at the least, eliminate federal student loans. And so the Debt Collective, actually wrote an executive authority working with our legal scholars that Biden could sign right now. If you go to debtcollective.org/flick of a pen, you can find the actual text of the executive order Biden can sign. And so what we've done in the past is actually discovered this authority. It's in the Higher Education Act of 1965 that gives the president and the Secretary of Education the authority to eliminate federal student loans. So just some brief history, the Debt Collective actually had a debt strike. It was called the Corinthian 15. This was 5 or 6 years ago. Corinthian College was a for-profit predatory college. For-profit predatory colleges exist and are the scum of the earth, and they also get federal funding, and they should be eliminated. So there were students that went to Corinthian College, and 15 of them actually went on a debt strike. They refused to make their payments, and the Debt Collective actually found this obscure legal authority that exists in the Higher Education Act that says, actually, the President of the United States can eliminate student loans if you've been defrauded by a for-profit college. Well, the Department of Education at the time, in 2015, had never canceled any student debt before. They had never canceled student debt before. And so we had tens of thousands of individuals. You know, if you were just one person and you were to call the Department of Education and say, I was defrauded by a for-profit college, I need my debt forgiven, they didn't have a process to do that, and they would have likely ignored you. But when tens of thousands, this is really the power of a debtors union, when tens of thousands of individuals signed the paperwork, we established the legal paperwork that would basically allow for this debt to be canceled. When tens of thousands of people filled out this paperwork, we really politicized this effort. We got media attention. Then Senator Warren got involved. And the Department of Education basically had to scoop up our process, and now it is the law of the land, right? And so now if you've been defrauded by a for-profit college, you can file what's called a borrower defense to repayment application, and hopefully your student debt can be forgiven. So that was the history with the Debt Collective, the Corinthian 15 strike, and how we have really escalated our campaign from actually achieving debt elimination, right? We've then expanded that and said, wait a minute, according to the Higher Education Act, all of this debt can be forgiven, not just for people who attended for-profit predatory colleges and universities, right? So now we are demanding the abolition of all of this, all of federal student loans, which Biden can do with the stroke of a pen, and we'll keep going for private student loans as well. So that's just a brief history. I think I could talk so much about the Debt Collective and some of the work that we do, but you can go to debtcollective.org and you can actually join the union. And so you can pay a membership fee or not. It's a debtors union, right? You can pay $0 a month and join the union and say, actually, with the collective power of the debt that you hold, that is actually an asset, right? And together we can start to leverage our financial power. And so there's this old capitalist saying that says, if you owe the bank $100,000, the bank owns you. But if you owe the bank $100 million, then you own the bank. And so collectively, we believe that we own the bank. As Melissa talked about, the structure of banks really having a chokehold on the 99%. We believe we own the bank. And so would encourage people to join the debtors union, because that's how we've been able to win billions of dollars of cancellation thus far.
Awesome. Thank you, Braxton. In the chat, raise your hand or put a fist in there if you're going to go over to the Debt Collective and join the debtors union today when we get off of this call. I think one of the most compelling things that I've witnessed during the pandemic, I keep saying that it's been horrible and we've lost so many lives and people have really struggled, but it's proven that all of the things they told us were impossible are very much possible, are a reality, and are good for our society and for our economy, right? Advanced child tax credit payments, I think, was a lesson in what it might look like to have a universal basic income. The New York Times just came out with a study that says that babies born to parents who were getting a universal basic income had better brain function, right? So being relieved of debt and having economic freedom not only makes us healthier as a society economically, but it makes us healthier people, and we can have babies with bigger brains so that they are actually able to utilize the great information that we have in our education system. And it just should be free. College should be free. Information is so widely available that we don't need to pay for it. anymore. So thank you for those offers. Folks, we have a lot of time left. So if you have questions, please place them in the Q&A. And if you can't figure that out, just drop them in the chat. Sam is hanging around to field questions. And let us know, right? Without student debt, what would you do? In the chat, put if student debt were canceled today, without student debt, what might you be able to realize in your life? I'm going to scroll through this chat here, and I'll let Sam take over for the Q&A.
Sure. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A so far, and I think, to any of our speakers. But first, so folks are wondering, can you talk about the difference between, kind of from a strategic standpoint, pursuing student debt cancellation via Congress versus just going straight to the executive, straight to Joe Biden? And it sounds like, we're advocating for going to President Biden, and why is that?
Sure, I can start with that, and then if Braxton wants to fill in whatever I miss. I don't know if anybody has noticed, but the Senate is pretty awful right now. And you have Sinema and Manchin that are basically blocking all the good things. Like all of the good things, they're just like the Department of No on. So if we were to put the topic of debt cancellation to the Congress, we would probably get a watered down bill out of the House, because the House would probably barely pass 10K cancellation out of the House. And then the Senate, they would whine and complain and say that every negative thing that's talked about student debt cancellation. And then not only wouldn't it pass, it would just set it back. And if it did pass, it would be like $500 for every person who was born in January of an odd year 50 years ago or something like that. Like they would do some really ridiculous test around it. And so that's why advocates are firmly committed to the EO, because we had a good Congress back in 1965. And so Congress already did the work. They passed a bill and they gave the president the authority to, compromise and make a negotiation on the debt. So the president can do that. So one, why make the Congress work twice? Two, the current Congress is pretty awful, and we can't even get basic things like the child tax credit reauthorized that we need. And we can moving Biden is easier than moving, 50 plus one or 60 votes in the Senate. And so I think that we're getting there. And we have different theories of change on this. And that's why it's good that we are a big movement with people taking up different lanes in this fight. So the lane that I'm in is we're going to hold the president's hand as much as he needs to get him there to do the EO and slip that pen in his hand and celebrate when he signs it. Braxton, do you want to chime in?
No, I think you covered it. I think there's this, often the White House will say, President Biden will be glad to cancel student debt if Congress will send him a bill. And the truth is Congress has already done that. The Higher Education Act, which was reauthorized by Congress years ago, just a couple decades ago, gave the Secretary of Education that authority. So the bill has been passed. It is now the president's turn to enact and administer full student debt cancellation.
Great. So then another question that we're getting has to do with numbers, and folks are asking about, it seems like we hear about $10,000 of debt cancellation, $50,000 of debt cancellation, cancel it all. And there's some confusion about these numbers, like where do they come from? What would the different effects be? So if you could speak to that for a minute, that would be great.
Sure. So again, the Debt Collective advocates for full student debt cancellation. President Biden ran on canceling a minimum of $10,000 for everyone. He also said he would cancel all of your student debt if you went to a public college or any HBCU and make under $125,000 a year. That's what he ran on. So that's usually where that 10K number comes from. No one ever says the minimum part. They just say 10K, but that's where that 10K came from. 50K came from Senator Warren and Senator Schumer, who have started that off of a resolution. The sort of irony there is, that number is a bit arbitrary. And actually the individuals who did that study years ago have actually shifted their numbers. They don't say 50 anymore. They say it's actually 75K, according to them, is a bit ideal. The reality is that not canceling all student debt is going to leave out millions of borrowers. And we shouldn't be in the business of choosing who is worthy and unworthy of paying for college, right? So we believe in free college. So that's why we believe in full student debt cancellation. So all of those numbers are a bit arbitrary. Sometimes I think people try to meet a technocratic test to make sure that, I get this concern that what if there is a small sliver of people who are somehow very wealthy, but also have some student debt, right? One, those people don't exist, but if they were, right, we should just tax them. We should have a tax on the wealthy, right? So that's how we can make sure that people are paying their fair share on the back end if that's a concern for folks. So we advocate for full student debt cancellation. We should also tax the rich and the wealthy, and we should have free college.
And I think with that, there are some people, I call them the bad group chat. So it's the people that oppose canceling student loan debt. So like you might have heard of Larry Summers, Adam Looney, Matt Iglesias, Beth Akers, and a few other people. I call them the bad group chat. And I imagine them texting each other about all of these selfish people with student loan debt and how they're just these wealthy people. And that makes me laugh. And I realize how ridiculous they are. So we're going to win. And so what happens is the people in the bad group chat, they're the ones that are whining to the administration about who's worthy for cancellation. And they use this like math that other economists literally mock them for. They got Justin Wolfers from Michigan got dragged by all of the good economists last week when he tweeted out a flawed study from Brookings by Adam Looney. And so that's where a lot of these like numbers, because it's like doing big things can be scary for people in power. And so that's why I view it's our job is to make things less scary. So they have the courage to go big. And that means like I personally would rather this take a little bit longer to get cancellation, so we get the biggest possible cancellation, than to see the president backed into a corner and do something I would consider inadequate, like 5K or 10K. So as long as the loans are paused, if it takes a little bit longer to get the biggest possible win, like that's how we do it.
Great, thanks. And then another question here. Can you speak a bit about the intersection of race and student debt and what impact canceling student loan debt would have on the racial wealth gap?
Sure, I'll start this off again. And Melissa, you can follow up. So the student loan debt crisis is a racial justice issue, plain and simple. The people that are burdened the most by student loan debt are non-white borrowers. They're Black, they're Hispanic borrowers. Black women in particular are the most disproportionately burdened by student loan debt. So about 20 years after graduation, white borrowers have paid off about 95% of their student loans. That same 20 years, Black borrowers typically still owe about 95% of their student loans. We know that borrowers of color have 100% more student loan debt than white borrowers. Just to bring gender in here, 2/3, we can't separate race from gender, but 2/3 of student loan debt is held by women. And so this crisis is really this crisis is burdening all of us, but not all of us equally, right? Black borrowers and Hispanic borrowers in particular are sharing this crisis in a really, really disproportionate way. And so, there's talk about, canceling student debt and how it's a racial justice issue, and it is. So, canceling student debt would actually narrow the racial wealth gap by a pretty steep margin. And that's because Black borrowers and Hispanic borrowers have to take out student loans in order to go to school, right? I went to HBCU in North Carolina, over 90% of Black students who go to of Black students have to borrow federal dollars in order to go to college, right? So this idea that, you know, you shouldn't have taken out loans, or you shouldn't have taken out so much, that's just not the reality, particularly for Black borrowers, right? We literally, almost all of us have to borrow money in order to afford college, because you know, it's important to use active language here, right? Sometimes I see people say Black borrowers have less wealth than white borrowers. Black borrowers were stripped of wealth, right? Hispanic borrowers were stripped of wealth. The '08 housing crisis, borrowers, Black and brown people lost billions and trillions of dollars worth of household wealth. Exactly, lost trillions of dollars worth of household wealth just a decade ago. So, you know, over the past 10 years, this crisis has the amount of student loan debt has doubled, but it particularly weighs on Black and brown borrowers. And so, you know, that's just another benefit of canceling student debt, as it begins to narrow that racial wealth gap and starts to close some of those racial disparities that we see.
And then I saw David's comment, and I think it's really important for all of us who work in this space to understand that, like, yes, student debt impacts people all across the spectrum of, like, the disparate impact on communities of color and Black and brown borrowers, on women borrowers. And that doesn't erase the fact that other people have student debt as well. And it helps become a lens in terms of building a coalition, because a lot of times the opponents of debt cancellation, that they will put out a stereotype. It's like, oh, just some, like, rich white kids that have student loan debt, so that's why we can't cancel it. But when they say that, that's actually causing harm to Black and brown borrowers. And Black and brown borrowers are more than students, because you have a lifetime of, end up with parents who are more likely to be Black and brown that take out PLUS loans. And a lot of folks aren't even talking about PLUS loans, which are the parent loans for undergraduate education. And so we're seeing a huge growth in PLUS loans, and the folks who are taking them out are in their 50s and their 60s, which means they're choosing each month between paying back, like paying their loans back for their kids to have a chance of a good future, or their retirement. So it's hurting people all across the age spectrum. And it's really important that as we do this work, that we have a race analysis, we have a gender analysis, we have, you know, this impacts LGBTQ students. A lot of them, their parents will disown them, and so then they're taking out debt. And so we can just see how this debt really impacts all of these different kinds of people in different ways. And all of these stories and all these voices are really important, and that we have to really organize from this place of confidence and this place of really uplifting how this can have a disparate impact.
Great, thanks. And then another question is from Ethan, and asks, what would you say to those who think that expanding programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is an adequate response to this crisis, to the student loan debt crisis?
Oh, I'm against public service loan forgiveness. I think that we should pay people who work in public service better wages, and we should have free college and cancel everyone's student loan debt. I think the idea that if you have student loan debt, you're expected to take a lower paying job and stick it out for 10 years in order to have the ability to have some kind of dignity at the end of 10 years is a really problematic way of going about structuring a society.
I should mention public service loan forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness, or PSLF, is just one of the few repayment programs that the Department of Education has. They are all broken. None of them work. Public service loan forgiveness has a 99% denial rate. People are being denied for very small, tedious paperwork, things like that, putting the date wrong or something like that, or just being the Trump, Betsy DeVos administration and just wrongfully denying people. So, like I said earlier, we just shouldn't be in the business of deciding that, you know, I appreciate nurses, I appreciate teachers, but they are no more or less deserving of free college than anyone else. So these programs don't work. That's why we need full student loan cancellation. And you know, the Biden administration right now is trying to make some tweaks to the current public service loan forgiveness. And we've had fix after fix after fix, and it continues to not work. And so, you know, my colleague Thomas likes to compare it to a Rube Goldberg machine, just trying to retrograde it and make it fit. And every time you change one thing, something else messes up, and it's just not an efficient way of canceling student loan debt, right? We should just wipe it away with one stroke of a pen.
Yeah, and with that, Braxton's heard this before, but I get so cranky about policy folks because I love our friends who focus on policy, but lots of times they get really into the weeds of like how you can tweak specific things, and I'll zero in like, let's make IDR better, or let's make this better, let's make that better. And they miss the actual problem that's coming at us, which is that this debt is wrong and this debt shouldn't exist. So that's why we cancel first, and then we have all those other nuancey conversations, because there are some good policy things that are on the horizon. The Department of Ed is moving to get rid of the ability of universities to be able to withhold transcripts for non-payment. A lot of people, if their parents didn't pay their bill, they can't get their transcript, which means now that they can maybe pay a little bit of tuition to go back to school, they don't have access to their transcript. So those are the kinds of like little tweaks that can happen that are really important and will help people's lives and are really, you know, that's critical. But when it comes to the actual debt, it's cancellation first, and then we can talk about bankruptcy protections, and then we can talk about what happens if there's going to be, you know, financing going forward. So it's like cancellation first, because these are the people that are hurting, and we can stop people that are hurting. So that's like, it's like triaging. So this is what we can do right now. Do that. Then start the other cascading issues that come up. Braxton, does that make sense? Or
so another question here is kind of about like the rhetorical part of this or the messaging part, but what would you say to the common argument that people who have student loan debt have a responsibility to pay down their debt just like anyone else who takes out a loan or something, and that canceling debt for a bunch of young people actually sends them the wrong message when they're just starting out, you know, on their path as adults, sort of?
I mean, it's not fair. Like, we should have never had the debt in the first place. This idea that if you were wanting to go to college and your parents couldn't write a check. So if you're a rich kid, you get free college in America. Your parent writes a check, and your parent most likely took advantage of 529 programs where they got tax cuts. They got tax giveaways to save for college. And you're getting that college, you're not paying a tax, you're not paying a tax on that transfer of wealth. So rich kids get free college. No one's saying that the rich kids should have to pay tax on their benefit or this or that. But poor working class and middle class people are supposed to somehow have this obligation to pay back this bill because they weren't born wealthy. So like, I considered it a tax. Like, why do we have a poor tax on higher education? So if you're poor, you have to pay a tax to be able to get a job in America. And it's not loans. And I think that it's not a decision that people made. It's not going out and buying a Lamborghini, even though the price is kind of like up there with the cost of a Lamborghini. This is your pathway to be able to have a job. It's your pathway to be able to serve your community, to fulfill the path in your life. And if you're rich, you can get it for free and no one questions it. And if you're poor or working class, you're supposed to just say thank you and suck up being miserable for 10 to 25 years.
I'm gonna really double down on this. It's important to remember, I think sometimes when we say free college, people go, oh my gosh, right? We used to have free college, or a very low fee for college, just decades ago. But that was when it was mostly white folks that could attend college, right? So we've already done this. What we're demanding is a world in part that has already existed. What happened was in the Reagan era, when Black and brown people started going to college and started having protests on campus, there was a neoliberal economic agenda that said, we are going to make this predatory, we're gonna have some predatory inclusion here. You're Black, you're brown, you wanna go to college? Sure, but you're gonna pay for it. And so that really is sort of the beginning of what birthed this commodification of higher education. And so really, what I hear when we have this shock and horror of free college is actually really a frustration about who all gets to go to college, because we used to have a world where white people did go to college for free. And so we're really asking for parity. We're asking for what the Joe Bidens of the world, his generation had, which was an opportunity to go to college for free, or a very, very low fee that if you were to look at today, you would probably balk at how cheap college was. So the other thing is student loans are morally illegitimate. And so we actually have an obligation to not pay back student loans because it's morally illegitimate, right? And so wiping out student debt there's actually a moral mandate to eliminate these loans because it's a moral infringement on our society.
Great. And then just we have like 2 more questions here. The next is sort of also a messaging question, but it says, we've heard this rhetoric from Joe Biden where he's saying, well, students who are low income, who went to public universities, I'm okay with forgiving part of their student loan debt, but people who went to Princeton or so on, why should we be forgiving their student loan debt? And I'm wondering if you all think that it's okay to make a distinction between borrowers based on what universities they attended, and if not, why that's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. I'm not just saying that somebody went to private. One, we don't have enough seats in public colleges for everybody. So unfortunately, privates and private nonprofit colleges fulfill an important part of the ecosystem in higher education right now. Lots of times because of the defunding of higher education, a lower income student will end up with less debt coming out if they went to a private college versus going to their in-state public college. Since 2006, the majority of the Ivies have been loan free for families making under 70 grand to 100 grand of income. I believe that's now up to 125 of income. So they might just be taking out a little bit of loans to supplement in travel or housing. So I think that when we're dividing it up, you're trying to say like, you're putting back a choice. And you have some families who will say if their kid's going to be first generation in college, they have to go to a Catholic college or they have to go to their local Christian college. And those are private. And so you're going to punish someone because of what the constraints the parents put on them for where they could go to higher education. And when it comes down to it, there's no such thing as a true private university in our country because all of the private colleges are subsidized as they are tax-free, and the ones that are nonprofit. Braxton can talk more about the for-profit space. I'm not as familiar with the for-profit space, but the nonprofit space, they don't pay taxes. And they're basically just real estate hedge funds that don't pay taxes. And so they all are subsidized by federal funds. So it's a distinction without a difference. And the messaging needs to be that we cancel it all, and then we figure out the free college going forward.
Okay, great. And then the last question we have is, what are the next steps for folks who want to get involved? How can we really move this forward and start to exert real pressure on President Biden?
I'll start. I'm putting the link in the chat. So we have, sorry, actually, let me put one more link in the chat. This is how you can get involved with some of the things that the Debt Collective is doing. It is go time right now. Payments are set to resume May 1st. That literally will not happen, or it will financially crush millions of individuals and tank our economy and do worse things, like take people out of their homes, or some people have contemplated doing even more drastic things to themselves. And so this is very urgent. And so we really need people to get involved. The Debt Collective is having an action in Washington, D.C. on April 4th at noon. We'll be at the Department of Education, making our voices heard. I also just put a link in the chat where you can get involved with deeper structural organizing with the Debt Collective. But we need everyone to call, right? Their members of Congress, to email. We need people to do local actions in their community. We need people's pastors speaking about this, presidents of universities we need your teachers. There is no voice that's too small. We need everyone raising their voice to demand full student debt cancellation, because it really is go time. And I speak to so many people, here at the Debt Collective, members who are in such dire situations, who are just a check away from living in their cars, from rationing their medicine, having their social security check garnished if student loans are turned back on. So I just wanted to sort of highlight the urgency of this issue, especially we've just lost a child tax credit for tens of millions of families that were having just $250, $300 extra on cash on the month, on the table per month to be able to feed their families, right? This is a really urgent issue. So there's no action that you can take that's too small. And I think what we also really want are really creative ways to draw attention to the student loan debt crisis. Melissa sort of spoke to this, but debt has really been a tool of isolation. It is a form of social control. It has been a disciplining, if I can say the word, disciplining mechanism for generations of people to teach us to sit back and, like Melissa said, not talk about how much debt we have. So one really radical action you can take is to start being vocal about how much debt you have. I don't know exactly how much I have, 40-some thousand, maybe almost 50,000. I don't check the Navient portal very often, but to start being vocal about how much debt you have, and to say, this isn't necessarily $40,000 of student debt I have. This is $40,000 that the 1% says that I owe them, and I refuse that, right? And so if you can, we're also encouraging people to, we're likely going to be announcing some type of debt strike, where if there are many safe ways where you can get to $0 a month, whether it's taking advantage of some type of program that the Department of Education has. We're encouraging folks to use these safe tools available to you to be able to keep your money in your pocket, because the Department of Education does not need that money. We've seen that over the past 2 years. You need your money, right? And so there's a lot of ways you can get involved. Melissa, you can take it away with all the other stuff that folks can do. We were just together at the White House in front of a band, and that was very fun.
Yep. So my team is going to keep doing monthly actions at the White House to kind of keep their staff on their toes. And if I can raise more money, I'll do it more often. So if anyone knows donors that want to help cause some trouble, I will spend it wisely. And the other part of this is a political angle, because the midterms are coming up. And so one thing that you can do is, for example, anyone here from California? So the California primaries are in June, which if the loans turn back on, that would mean that there'd be a good chance that it would impact the primaries, because the primaries in California are top two elections, or the top two, it's a runoff situation. And so if loans are turned back on, why would anybody want to vote for the party to turn the loans back on? And so I think that these are, and obviously, like, I want to make sure that we win the elections, because I do not want any of those like Trumpy people winning anywhere, because they're all nasty. So that's why it's really important that we either cancel in May or we extend another year and we deal with it next year. And I think reminding people of the electoral impact. Color of Change put out a really powerful study last year about the importance of, they used the phrase eliminating student loan debt, because they found that polled better. And that if loans were not eliminated, it would have a negative impact on turnout in the election. So I think as we get closer to the elections, reminding people, calling your local elected to be like, hey, call the White House and tell them they need to, like, turn your congressperson into a megaphone that can call the White House, turn your state rep into a megaphone. And as younger people get elected to office, they all have student loan debt. So we can basically, in Congress right now, you can almost have a caucus of people with student loan debt. And in the same with like your state ledge and your county, have your counties or parishes or are organized. So it's really, it's this like, it's just a push. And I think the other part is that we've done a really good job in the student debt space of not making it a toxic issue, in that an issue that gets so caught up into the negative online space that no one wants to talk about it, or people are just like, we have to keep this issue to be like, this is positive and joyful, and that it's a good thing to do this. So keeping the tempo upbeat to be like, we're going to win this. And here's why, and 46 million people's lives will benefit from this. So that's where we're at. My website for my org is finally getting finalized. Build Back Better kind of caused a derailment of the last 4 months of my life. So that website will get launched, and then there'll be more ways for y'all to be able to plug in on fun creative actions. And then if you also want to do fun creative actions in your local communities, let's collab. But India, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been really great to be with you, and it's always fun to hang out with you, Braxton, and to meet you, Sam.
Yeah, this has been, I'm searching, I'm excited, right? I'm searching for the excitement. I think hearing the statistics and, you know, me having $60,000 in student loans to get my RN, you know, and being a college attending parenting person, right? This conversation has been refreshing, sobering, you know, to think about how dire the consequences could be if we don't see the elimination of student debt. So I want to thank Braxton for being here. Thank you, Melissa. I can't wait to join in on some of these awesome actions. I would encourage anyone who is in here to follow Melissa on Twitter. She's got some of the most riveting spicy posts of anyone out there. Follow Braxton as well. Join the Debt Collective and follow Roots Action. And we will continue to organize together. And thank y'all for coming out. And to you, I give the gift of 6 minutes. Thanks for coming, everybody.